Emma sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the soft light spilling through the curtains of her Seattle home. The rain outside tapped gently on the window, matching the rhythm of her thoughts. 8 years of marriage had turned her house into a quiet museum of memories, beautiful but untouched. Her husband Daniel had become more like a polite roommate than a partner. He worked late, traveled often, and spoke in brief sentences that carried no warmth. The love that once filled their evenings had faded into an echo. That night, the phone rang. Daniel's voice came through, calm but distant. He told her he'd be staying an extra week in Chicago for business. Emma tried to sound understanding, but as she hung up, the silence that followed felt heavier than ever. She looked around the bedroom, the same place where they had once laughed and whispered about their dreams. Now, the air felt cold, the bed untouched on his side. She reached out to fix the crooked frame of their wedding photo, the one showing two smiling faces that no longer existed. The next morning brought another gray sky, and with it, a message from Daniel's father, Richard. He said he would stop by to drop off some family papers. Emma didn't mind. Richard was one of the few people she still felt comfortable around. He was in his early 60s, tall and soft-spoken, with gentle eyes that carried both strength and sadness. After his wife's passing, he had become quieter but never unkind. When he arrived that afternoon, the air in the house shifted. Emma felt a kind of warmth she hadn't felt in months and ordinary comfort. Like someone had finally opened a window. Richard smiled as he stepped inside carrying a small folder. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything," he said politely. "Not at all," she replied. "It's nice to have company." They talked for a while about small things: Daniel's work, the weather, the roses Richard had planted in his yard. Then, as he walked through the hallway, Richard noticed something. The bedpost in the master bedroom had cracked near the base. Something Emma had stopped paying attention 2 weeks ago. He frowned slightly. "That looks dangerous. It could break further if it's not fixed." Emma gave a small laugh. "Daniel said he'd repair it months ago, but you know how busy he is?" Without saying another word, Richard set his folder on the table and quietly went back to his car. When he returned, he was carrying a small toolbox. Emma watched as he knelt by the bed, working carefully, tightening screws, smoothing the wood, and reattaching the loose section. There was something steady about the way he moved, a patience that felt almost comforting to watch. She stood nearby, holding the flashlight for him, and for the first time in a long time, she noticed the quiet hum of life in her home again. It wasn't the job Daniel never finished or the empty promises that had worn thin. It was someone actually doing something out of care, not obligation. "There," Richard said after a while, wiping his hands on a cloth. "Good as new." Emma smiled almost shyly. "You didn't have to do that." He looked at her kindly. "I know, but when something's broken, you fix it before it falls apart completely." Those words landed deeper than he realized. She looked at the bed, then at him, and suddenly her chest tightened. How long had it been since someone cared enough to notice what was broken in the house or in her heart? Richard didn't stay long after that. He finished his tea, shared a few kind words, and promised to check in again later in the week. When he left, Emma walked back to the bedroom. The sunlight was softer now, slipping through the window and touching the repaired wood. She sat down, running her fingers over the smooth surface. It wasn't just a fixed bedpost, it was a reminder that someone had seen her. Even for a brief moment, as night came, she lay awake, thinking about the day. There was no guilt, no strange thoughts, only gratitude and confusion. Why did it feel so meaningful? Why did a simple act of kindness stir something deep inside her that she couldn't explain? Daniel texted her late that night. "Hope your day was good. Got meetings tomorrow." She stared at the message for a while, then set the phone down. The distance between them wasn't measured in miles, it was measured in silence. She missed him, but more than that, she missed being missed. The rain returned, tapping gently against the window again. Emma turned on her side, facing the repaired bedpost, and thought about Richard's quiet words. When something's broken, you fix it before it falls apart completely. Maybe he wasn't talking about wood and nails after all. The next morning, She noticed a small note left near the door. It was from Richard. He had stopped by early to drop off the documents he forgot yesterday. The note was short and simple. "Take care of yourself, Emma. Don't let the small things stay broken." Her eyes lingered on those words. They felt too kind for someone who didn't have to care. She folded the note and placed it inside a drawer, unsure why she wanted to keep it. Days passed, and she found herself thinking about their brief interaction more often than she should have. Not because it was inappropriate, it wasn't, but because it reminded her of something real, something gentle, something she hadn't felt in years. Every sound in the house reminded her of that afternoon: the soft hum of his calm voice, the faint smell of wood polish, the quiet presence of someone who didn't rush through her like the rest of the world for years. Emma had convinced herself that this was what marriage became after time: a steady, practical bond where passion turned into routine. But maybe that wasn't love at all. Maybe love was supposed to make you feel seen, not just tolerated one evening. As she sat reading by the lamp, she looked at the door and half expected Richard to knock again. She quickly shook off the thought, feeling a mix of guilt and longing. It wasn't about him, it was about what he represented: care, attention, presence. She whispered to herself, "I just want to feel something again." The sound of her own voice startled her. The words hung in the quiet air, heavy but true. Outside, the rain had stopped. The city lights flickered softly through the mist. Emma leaned back on the repaired bed and closed her eyes. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. Maybe Daniel would change, maybe he wouldn't. But tonight, for the first time in a long while, she felt the faint pulse of something alive within her heart, again a reminder that she was still capable of feeling, still capable of being seen, and though she didn't realize it yet. That small moment, Richard fixing the bed, was the start of something that would change her life forever. The next few days moved quietly for Emma. The house was cleaner, brighter, and strangely more peaceful after Richard's visit. But inside, she felt a storm she couldn't name. Every time she walked into the bedroom, her eyes fell on the bedpost he had repaired. And it brought a strange mix of comfort and confusion. It wasn't about the wood or the work kit, it was about how someone had finally noticed what needed care. Daniel still hadn't called, except for a few short messages about meetings and travel delays. Emma replied politely, but without warmth. She didn't know if he even noticed the difference. She told herself not to expect much, but she couldn't stop feeling the emptiness growing wider between them. On Thursday afternoon, she was watering the plants when she heard a car pull up. She looked out the window and saw Richard again, holding a small bag of groceries. He smiled when he saw her and waved lightly. "I was passing by and thought I'd drop these off," Kay said when she opened the door. "You really didn't have to," she said, though her smile gave away her relief at seeing him. "It's nothing," he replied. "I noticed you mentioned running low on supplies last time. Thought I'd save you a trip." He placed the bag on the counter and looked around the kitchen. "You've kept the house beautiful, Emma. It feels like a home." The words caught her by surprise. No one had called her house a home in a long time. She nodded softly, trying not to let her emotions show. "I try," she said. Richard noticed the small details. Most people overlooked the fresh flowers she arranged in vases, the books stacked neatly on the table, the candles she lit in the evenings to fill the silence. They weren't just decorations. They were her way of keeping herself company. After a few moments of small talk, Richard asked if she needed help with anything else around the house. She hesitated, then mentioned the leaky faucet in the kitchen. He rolled up his sleeves and got to work without hesitation. She stood nearby, watching him move with quiet focus. There was something comforting about his presence. No rush, no complaints, just calm effort. When the faucet stopped dripping, he smiled with a hint of pride. "They're all fixed. No more midnight dripping sounds to drive you crazy." She laughed. The sound soft but genuine. "I've been meaning to call someone for weeks." "Thank you." "Sometimes," he said, wiping his hands, "it just takes the right tools and a little patience." Again, his simple words carried meaning far beyond the task. She found herself looking at him a moment longer than she meant to. He noticed but didn't say a word. They sat in the living room for tea afterward. Richard talked about his late wife, how she loved old jazz records and how she used to hum while cooking. Emma listened with gentle curiosity. "You must miss her a lot," she said quietly. "I do," he admitted, his voice steady but soft. "You never stop missing someone you truly shared life with, but you learn to live with the missing." That sentence lingered in her mind. She thought about Daniel Knock-On, but somehow missing from her life in another way. She missed the version of him that used to listen, used to laugh, used to notice her before leaving. Richard stood by the door and said, "If you ever need anything fixed or even just company, don't hesitate to call." She smiled, grateful but cautious. "Thank you, Richard. That means a lot." When he left, she watched his car disappear down the street, her heart oddly heavy. It wasn't Lavat, at least not the kind she understood, but it was something human, something kind. The next day, she tried to focus on her work from home. But every few minutes, her thoughts drifted back to him, his gentle tone, his steady hands, his way of seeing her without judgment. She hadn't realized how starved she'd been for that kind of presence. That evening, it started raining again. The sound filled the empty spaces of the house. Emma sat by the window with her tea, watching the water stream down the glass. The phone buzzed. Was Daniel again. Might extend trip another week. Big project. She read it twice, then placed the phone face down. "No, I miss you. No, how are you?" Just business. She felt a sharp ache in her chest. For years, she had convinced herself that this was normal, that people just grew apart. But now she wasn't so sure. Maybe they didn't grow apart by accident. Maybe one person just stopped showing up. 2 days later, Richard appeared again, this time to fix the curtain rod in the bedroom that had come loose. She tried to insist it wasn't necessary, but he brushed it off. "It's a 5-minute job," he said. She stood by the doorway as he worked, watching the rainlight from the window reflect off his silver hair. When he finished, he turned to her with a small smile. "Daniel's lucky to have you, Emma," he said quietly. "I just wish he showed it more often." His words hit her harder than he intended. She tried to hide her emotions, pretending to adjust the bedsheets. "It's just how he is," she murmured. Richard looked at her for a moment, then spoke softly. "Sometimes people get too busy proving their worth to the world and forget to care for what's already theirs." She felt her throat tighten. No one had said something that honest to her in years. She turned away so he wouldn't see her tears. Richard noticed and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, not possessive, not wrong, just a comforting touch. "You deserve to feel seen, Emma," he said quietly. For a moment, she didn't move. She wanted to thank him, to say something, but her words got caught between her heart and her lips. Before she could find her voice, he stepped back and gathered his tools. "I should go," he said softly. "It's getting late." After he left, Emma sat on the edge of the bed, the same one he had fixed before. She stared at the smooth wooden post, running her fingers over it slowly. It felt like more than just furniture. It was a symbol of care, of effort, of something she hadn't realized she needed. That night she couldn't sleep. The rain had stopped, but her thoughts didn't. She replayed his words in her mind. The tone of his voice, the quiet way he looked at her, not with desire, but with understanding. It had been so long since someone had truly understood her. She turned off the lamp and lay down, staring at the ceiling. A small tear rolled down her cheek, though she wasn't sure why. Maybe it was sadness, maybe gratitude, or maybe this strange feeling of being noticed again after years of invisibility. As she drifted off to sleep, she thought of Richard's kindness and how something so simple, a fixed bedpost, a repaired faucet, a few kind words had awakened something deep in her. She didn't know where it was leading, but she knew one thing for sure. Her heart had started to remember what care felt like, and that realization alone changed everything. The days that followed felt strange for Emma. Her house seemed fuller somehow, though nothing had changed. The light through the windows looked warmer, the air softer, and her thoughts more restless. She tried to focus on her daily routine, cleaning, cooking, reading, but her mind kept drifting to Richard. Every time she walked past something he had fixed, she felt a tug in her heart. It wasn't love, she told herself. It was gratitude. But gratitude shouldn't make your heart race when you hear a car stop outside. That Friday afternoon, sky turned gray again, and thunder began to roll in the distance. Emma sat by the window with her book, pretending to read when she saw Richard's truck pull into the driveway. Her heart skipped, though she didn't know why. He came to the door holding an umbrella and a small box of tools. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said with a light smile. "I was nearby and thought I'd check if everything's still working fine." "You never intrude," Emma said softly. Stepping aside to let him in, rain started falling heavily outside, drumming against the roof. Richard shook off his coat and placed his umbrella by the door. The sound of rain filled the quiet space between them. He glanced around the room, then said, "Looks like that curtain rod's holding up well." "It is," she replied, smiling faintly. "You've made this house stronger than it's ever been." He chuckled. "Just giving it a little care. That's all most things need." She looked at him for a moment, then turned away, busying herself with making tea. But even as she moved around the kitchen, she could feel his presence behind her, steady, calm, and warm. When she brought him the cup, their fingers brushed for a moment, and something electric passed between them. She quickly pulled her hand back. He noticed, but said nothing. They sat near the window, listening to the storm. Richard spoke about his life before retirement, how he missed the sound of his wife humming in the evenings, how quiet his house felt now. Emma listened closely. There was honesty in his words, a quiet ache she understood too well. After a long pause, he said, "You remind me a little of her, you know? She had that same calm strength, the kind that keeps a home standing when everything else feels like it's falling apart." Emma's heart caught in her throat. "I don't feel strong most days," she said. "I just keep going." "That's what strength looks like," he replied gently. The rain outside grew louder. A flash of lightning lit up the room, followed by the low rumble of thunder. She got up to close the window when a cold gust of wind rushed in, scattering papers across the table. Richard stood up to help her gather them. They both reached for the same sheet, their hands meeting in the middle. Neither of them moved for a moment. Their eyes met, and for that single second, it felt as if time stopped. Emma's breath caught. She looked down quickly, breaking the moment. "I'm sorry," she said, though she wasn't sure for what. "It's okay," Richard said quietly. "It's been a long time since I've been around someone who listens." His words pierced through her heart. For so long she had been invisible to her own husband, her emotions unnoticed, her needs unheard. And now, standing in front of her was a man who saw her clearly, yet she knew she was standing on dangerous ground. "I shouldn't be keeping you," she said quickly. "It's getting late." He hesitated before answering. "Emma, I need to say something. I don't want you to misunderstand me. I care about you. I see how lonely you are, and it hurts to watch. But I'd never want to cross a line." She looked at him, her eyes soft. "You haven't. You've been kind. That's all." He smiled faintly, but there was sadness in it. Sometimes kindness can turn into something more without us meaning it to. Neither of them spoke after that. The rain slowed to a quiet drizzle. Richard finished his tea, set the cup down, and walked toward the door. Emma followed him, not wanting the moment to end, but not knowing how to stop it, before leaving. He turned back and said, "You deserve happiness, Emma, even if it means asking for more than what you have." His words lingered long after he was gone. Emma stood at the door for several minutes, watching the rain fall on the empty street. Her heart felt heavy, not from guilt, but from realization. For years, she had been waiting for Daniel to see her, to notice her pain, to care enough to ask what was wrong. But now, she had found that recognition in someone who wasn't supposed to give it. That night, she couldn't sleep. The sound of rain faded into the distance, but her thoughts only grew louder. She remembered every word Richard had said, every look, every quiet moment of understanding. There was no wrongdoing between them, no touch that shouldn't have happened, no words out of place, but there was something deep and unspoken that scared her. When she finally drifted to sleep, she dreamed of her house, bright and full of life. In the dream, she wasn't alone. Someone was fixing a broken window while humming softly. It wasn't Daniel. It was Richard. And when she woke up, her heart ached with a strange mix of longing and guilt. The next morning, she stood in front of the mirror and studied her reflection. She looked different, alive in a quiet way. Her eyes had light again. It confused her. She wasn't in love with Richard. She couldn't be. But his presence had reminded her of what real connection felt like. Something she had almost forgotten existed. Later that day, Daniel called. His voice was casual, tired, distracted. He talked about meetings and deadlines, about how stressful things had been. Emma listened quietly, waiting for him to ask about her. But he didn't. When he finally paused, she said softly, "Daniel, when was the last time we really talked?" He sounded surprised. "We're talking now, aren't we?" She sighed, realizing how far apart they had drifted. "Never mind," she said gently when the call ended. She sat on the repaired bed, the same one that had become the center of so much reflection. She touched the wood Richard had smoothed out with his hands and whispered to herself, "He fixed more than just this bed. He reminded me what care feels like." Outside, the sky was clearing. The storm had passed, but something inside her had shifted forever. She didn't know what would happen next. She only knew she couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. Some lines, she realized, aren't about crossing boundaries. They're about realizing which ones should never have been there in the first place. When Daniel finally returned home, the house felt different. The walls looked brighter, the rooms smelled of fresh flowers, and Emma seemed calmer than she had in months. But behind her calm smile was a heart that had changed. She had spent days thinking about what she wanted, what she truly deserved. The time with Richard hadn't just opened her eyes. It had reminded her that love was more than living under the same roof. It was about presence, care, and effort. Daniel dropped his suitcase near the door and kissed her cheek quickly. "You look nice," he said distractedly, glancing at his phone. "Thank you," she replied quietly. She wanted to feel happy to see him, but instead all she felt was distance. He started talking about his meetings, his long flights, and his plans for the next quarter. She listened, nodding, but her mind was far away. She kept thinking about the quiet evenings with Richard, how peaceful those moments had been. How heard she had felt. After dinner, Daniel looked around and said, "You fixed the bed." She smiled faintly. "Your father did. He noticed the crack and helped." Daniel looked surprised. "Dad, really? I didn't think he'd still do that kind of work." "He did it without me asking," Emma said softly. "He just saw it needed care." Daniel didn't reply. He didn't realize the weight behind those words, how much they meant to her. He simply nodded and went back to checking his emails. That quiet dismissal was the moment Emma realized just how much they had drifted apart. The next morning, Richard stopped by to return a book he had borrowed. When Daniel saw him, he smiled warmly. "Dad, I didn't know you were helping out around here." Richard smiled politely. "Just a few repairs." "Emma's been managing the house beautifully." Emma greeted him with a calm smile. Her heart was racing, though she tried not to show it. The three of them sat in the living room for a short while. The conversation was light family updates, weather, small talk, but beneath it all was a silent current of unspoken emotion. Emma and Richard both knew something had changed between them, though nothing improper had ever happened. When Richard stood to leave, he shook Daniel's hand and said, "You've got a good woman here, son. Don't take her strength for granted." Daniel laughed, unaware of the deeper meaning behind his father's words. "I know, Dad. I'm lucky." After he left, Daniel turned to Emma and said, "He really likes you. You've always gotten along so well with him." Emma forced a small smile. "He's a good man. He listens." Daniel didn't catch the quiet emphasis in her voice. Instead, he went back to unpacking, leaving her standing there. Staring at the closed door Richard had just walked through. That evening, as they sat together in bed, Daniel talked about his new project. Emma listened quietly. When he finally paused, she said, "Daniel, Can we talk about us for a minute?" He frowned slightly. "About what?" "About us," she repeated gently. "I feel like we've been living next to each other, not with each other." He looked uncomfortable. "You know how work has been? It's not just work," she interrupted softly. "It's everything. We don't laugh anymore. We don't ask each other how we really feel. We're just here." He looked at her, confused. "Are you saying you're unhappy?" She hesitated, then said, "I'm saying I'm lonely, Daniel. And I've been lonely for a long time." Her words hit him like a quiet storm. For the first time in years, he saw the sadness in her eyes, the same sadness he had ignored while chasing his career. He didn't know what to say. Emma continued, "I'm not angry. I just want us to find what we lost. I want us to remember how to care again." Daniel sighed and ran a hand through his hair. "I thought I was doing all this for us, for a better future." She nodded. "I know, but a better future doesn't matter if we lose the present." Silence filled the room. The repaired bed creaked softly beneath them, a quiet reminder of what had been broken and fixed. Finally, Daniel reached for her hand. It was hesitant, but sincere. "I don't want to lose you," he said quietly. "Tell me how to fix this." Tears welled up in her eyes. "Start by being here. Not just physically really here. Talk to me. See me? Let's stop pretending that we're fine." He nodded slowly, guilt written across his face. "Well, I'll try. I promise." For the first time in a long while, she believed him not because of the words, but because of the way he said them. There was something different in his tone, something real. Days turned into weeks. And slowly, small changes began to appear. Daniel started coming home earlier. They began having dinner together again. Sometimes they talked for hours. Other times, they simply sat in silence. But it was a peaceful kind of silence. He noticed the things she did around the house, thanked. Her even brought home flowers, once a small gesture, but meaningful. One evening, Richard came by again, bringing a book for Daniel and a basket of apples from his garden. When Emma opened the door, their eyes met for a moment. There was a quiet understanding between them, gratitude, respect, and something bittersweet. "How are things?" he asked softly. "Better," she said with a gentle smile. "We're trying." He nodded approvingly. "That's good. Trying is what keeps love alive." When Daniel entered the room, the three of them shared a warm, light-hearted conversation. There was no tension, no hidden emotion, just peace. Before leaving, Richard looked at Emma one last time and said, "I'm glad to see the light back in your eyes." She smiled, though her throat tightened with emotion. "Thank you for everything." After he left, Emma sat with Daniel in the living room. The rain started again outside, soft and steady. Daniel reached over and took her hand. "I don't think I ever realized how far I'd drifted," he said quietly. "It happens," she said. "What matters is finding our way back." He squeezed her hand gently. "I want to do it right this time." That night they sat on the bed, the same one Richard had repaired on, talked until the rain stopped. It wasn't a perfect ending. Marriages rarely have those. But it was honest, and that honesty was enough. As she lay beside Daniel, came a thought about Richard's words, about kindness, Akena, and about how love sometimes comes in unexpected forms. I'm not always romantic, but always meaningful. Richard hadn't just repaired a piece of furniture. He had helped repair something inside her heart. In the quiet darkness, she whispered to herself, "Sometimes doing it right isn't about starting over. It's about choosing to care again." The moonlight fell across the repaired bed, soft and golden. For the first time in years, Emma felt peace, not because everything was perfect, but because she finally understood what love was supposed to feel like. It wasn't about passion that faded or promises that broke. It was about the steady, patient kind of care that heals what's been neglected. And this time, she promised herself she would never let it fall apart again.